All right, team. So I know a lot of you are doing t-tests for your analysis, and I wanted to show you how to create a graph like this, where each bar represents the average of that group. In this case, we're looking at lifespan. This is the average lifespan in captivity. And this group is the wild average lifespan in years of animals in the wild. Okay, so that way the graph represents the average of these two groups, and then we can add in these error bars which represent the standard error. So this is what we'll learn to do in this tutorial video. So let's get started. Okay, so here's our data. So here we have, it's already cleaned up all of our data. Lifespan of the wild, all of these animals, it's a huge data set. Lifespan of those in captivity, right? And so we've calculated the averages already for this data set for each of these. Okay. The next thing we need to do before we can make our graph is we need to calculate the standard deviation of this data set. Okay, so we're going to use the function standard deviation of a sample. Oops. S, and our data is for captivity is in D2 to D744. Okay, so calculate standard deviation first. Remember, standard deviation is a measure of the spread of our data, how spread out each one is. So we'll just copy that over, and then we'll change this to C, to C744. Okay, so we're calculating standard deviation of each. But these are huge standard deviations, and we want standard error for our error bars. Okay, standard error is traditionally the value that is used in biology to represent the error bars of our graph. All right, so the formula for standard error is standard deviation divided by the square root of sample size. So standard deviation divided by the square root of our sample size. That's the most common value for standard error. Okay, so let's figure out how to do that. So we want to take the standard deviation, so that number right there, we want to divide it by the square root. SQRT is the square root function, and we're going to divide it by the square root of that number right there. Okay. So I'd already calculated the sample size using the countif function. All right, and same thing over here. We want to divide this number, standard deviation. We want to divide standard deviation by the square root, SQRT, of 743. Close parentheses. Okay, so there's our standard error. So that represents the value that will be on our graph as our error bars that we see right here. All right, so how do we construct this? How do we get that graph? So if you were to highlight these columns and tell Excel to graph that, you want a bar chart, it's going to put every single observation as its own bar. And this doesn't tell us anything. This is garbage. We don't want that. Bye. Okay, so instead we want our bar chart. Remember, we want these values to represent the average of each of our data sets. So the average lifespan in captivity, average lifespan in the wild. Okay, so instead we can just highlight those cells, and then go over here to insert a 2D chart right here. Perfect. Okay, so now this number represents the average lifespan of captivity, the average lifespan of those in the wild. Cool. From here, we want to add in those error bars. So how do we do that? Okay, so let's go to up here where it says add chart element. And we want to go down to error bars. And don't let these fool you. Those aren't the actual standard error and standard deviation. We're going to go here to more error bar options. Okay, we don't want to use those. Those are not what we want right now. Okay, we want this one right here. More error bar options. We can leave these settings as is. We want vertical in both directions. In style, I like them with a cap. I think they look nice with a cap, but that's your call. All right, then I'm going to go down here to custom. Click on custom, and we're going to specify value. Specify value. Okay. This little option pops up once we click specify value. We can delete what's in both of these. And then for positive error bar value, select those. Same thing for negative error bar value. Select those values. So the standard error that we calculated right here. So that way it'll put one standard error above and one value of standard error below. We click OK. And beautiful. So now we can make sure we add all of our axis titles. So we want to label our vertical. What is vertical? So we use the average years. Okay. And what are we graphing? Make sure to always add a title. What are we graphing? Average lifespan in years of animals in captivity and in the wild. Okay. Some sort of title describing what's going on in your graph. What are we looking at here? So now, this number represents the average. This represents the standard error. And typically, if these error bars don't overlap, these error bars are not overlapping, that usually means that these two values are statistically different. Okay, and that should be confirmed by your t-test. From here, you can change the color of these if you want. You can change some other settings, but you should be good to go with this. And that's how you make a graph of the averages with the standard error as the error bars.